They changed the locks while I was at work. Find your own place, freeloader, Dad texted. I texted back the screenshots of 5 years of rent payments I'd been making. Then I called the landlord, my best friend, and now they're begging after he tripled their rent. I'm still processing everything that happened this week, so bear with me if this gets long. I need to get this off my chest because honestly, I can't believe my own family would do something this messed up. But here we are. Let me start from the beginning, so you understand the full picture. I, 26 male, have been living in the same house with my parents and younger brother Anthony for the past 5 years. Not by choice, mind you. After college, I moved back home temporarily while job hunting, but then life happened. My dad got laid off from his job at the factory, and suddenly our family went from comfortable to struggling real fast. The house we live in actually belongs to my best friend Jake's family. Jake and I have been tight since middle school, and when his grandmother passed away 3 years ago, she left him this property. It's nothing fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood, but it was paid off and Jake needed reliable tenants. When my family was facing potential eviction from our old place due to Dad's job loss, Jake offered to let us rent his inherited house at a really reasonable rate. Here's the thing though, and this is important. I'm the one who's been paying the rent. All of it. Every month for 5 years. When we first moved in, Dad was still looking for work, and Mom was only working part-time at a grocery store. Anthony was still in high school, playing video games most of the day, and showing zero interest in getting a part-time job like most kids his age. I had landed a decent job at a local accounting firm right out of college, so I stepped up. I told my parents I'd cover the rent temporarily until Dad got back on his feet. That temporarily turned into 5 years. Dad eventually found another job, but it paid significantly less than his previous one. Mom increased her hours but was still only making about $800 a month. Between the two of them, they were bringing in maybe $3,200 a month, which sounds okay until you factor in their car payments, insurance, utilities, groceries, and all of Dad's medical expenses. He's got diabetes and high blood pressure, so his medications alone cost nearly $400 monthly, even with insurance. So I kept paying the $1,200 monthly rent. It wasn't a huge burden for me since I was doing well at work and got promoted twice. Plus, Jake was giving us a really good deal. Market rate for that house would easily be $1,800 to $2,000, but he was only charging us $1,200 because we're friends and he knew our situation. The problem started about 2 years ago when my parents began treating me differently. Not better, worse. It's like they started resenting that I was the one keeping a roof over our heads. Dad especially seemed to hate that he wasn't the provider anymore. He'd make these snide comments about how I thought I was better than everyone else, how I was showing off by paying for things. I remember one specific incident that really opened my eyes to how they saw me. We were at a family barbecue at my uncle's house, and someone asked how we were all doing financially since Dad's layoff. Before I could say anything, Dad jumped in with this whole story about how he was back on his feet and providing for his family. He completely erased my contribution to keeping us housed and fed. When I tried to mention that I'd been helping out, Dad gave me this look that could have frozen hell over and said, "We don't need to air our dirty laundry in public." But then, later that same evening, when my cousin was bragging about his new promotion, Dad made some comment about how some of us understand what it means to be a real man and provider. The passive aggression was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Anthony didn't help. Once he graduated high school, instead of getting a job or going to college, he decided he wanted to be a content creator. He spent his days making TikTok videos and playing video games, contributing absolutely nothing to the household. But somehow, I was the problem for pointing out that a 20-year-old man should probably have some kind of job or educational goal. The kid had never worked a day in his life, never had to worry about rent, utilities, groceries, or anything else because I was covering it all. But when I'd suggest maybe it was time for him to contribute something, anything, to the household, I'd get lectures from my parents about being unsupportive and not understanding Anthony's creative process. His creative process, by the way, involved making 15-second videos of himself drinking different energy drinks and rating them. Real groundbreaking stuff. The tension really ramped up this past year. Dad got it in his head that since he was the man of the house, his name should be on the lease. He kept bugging me to talk to Jake about transferring everything over to him. I tried explaining that Jake was doing us a favor by keeping the rent low, and that changing the arrangement might complicate things. But Dad saw it as me trying to maintain control over his family. "You think because you pay some bills, you run this house?" he said to me one evening after I'd suggested that maybe Anthony should at least try to get a part-time job. "I'm still the father here. I make the decisions. But you don't pay the rent. I pointed out, which was apparently the wrong thing to say. Watch your mouth, he snapped. Just because you've got a fancy college job doesn't mean you can disrespect me in my own house. Your house? I asked. I'm literally the one paying for it. That's when Mom jumped in with her favorite line. Money isn't everything. This family isn't about who pays what bills. Except it kind of was, when those bills determined whether we had a roof over our heads or not. Things got weird in other ways too. Mom started making comments about how I was too old to be living at home, how I should be thinking about getting married and moving out. This was rich coming from someone whose 20-year-old son had never held a job and spent 12 hours a day on his gaming setup. But apparently, I was the problem child for being financially responsible. Most boys your age have already moved out and started their own families, she'd say while doing dishes. Don't you want your own space? Your own life? Meanwhile, Anthony would walk by with a bag of Cheetos, heading to his room to stream Fortnite for 3 people on Twitch, and she'd smile fondly at him, like he was pursuing a Nobel Prize. The double standard was mind-boggling. I was too old to be living at home at 26 while working and paying rent, but Anthony was perfectly fine to be at home at 20 doing absolutely nothing productive. I started keeping detailed records of everything I paid for, partly because I was getting sick of the implications that I was some kind of mooch. Rent, $1,200 monthly. Utilities, averaging $300 monthly. Groceries, I was covering about 60% of the food costs, roughly $400 monthly. Internet, $80 monthly for the high-speed package Anthony insisted he needed for his content creation. That was over $1,900 monthly that I was contributing to a household where I was apparently the problem child who needed to move out and get his own place. The final straw came last month during a family dinner. Dad announced that he thought it was time for me to find my own place because Anthony needed more space for his business. His business being making TikTok videos about energy drinks and unboxing packages he bought with money he borrowed from Mom, who borrowed it from her credit card. You're 26, kiddo, he said, not even looking at me while cutting his steak. Most people your age have their own place. It's time to let your brother spread his wings. I almost choked on my food. Spread his wings. He's never had a job. He's never paid for anything. How exactly is he going to spread his wings? Anthony is building something, Mom chimed in. He's got over 500 followers now. This could really take off. 500 followers. In 3 years of content creation, he'd managed to accumulate 500 people who were willing to watch him drink Red Bull and play video games. That was supposed to be a career. I pointed out that I was the one paying rent, and maybe Anthony should get an actual job before we started talking about giving him more space. That did not go over well. Dad accused me of lording money over the family and said that just because I paid rent didn't mean I owned the place. Mom chimed in that I was being selfish and holding the family back. How am I holding anyone back? I asked. I pay the bills, I don't cause problems, I mind my own business. What exactly am I holding back? Anthony needs room to grow, Dad said. He can't fully focus on his content with you constantly judging him. I wasn't constantly judging him. I was occasionally suggesting that a grown man might want to contribute something to the household he was living in for free. And besides, Mom added, wouldn't you be happier in your own place? You could decorate however you want, bring home whoever you want, really live your life. The irony was incredible. I was selfish for paying their rent and utilities while living in the smallest bedroom. Anthony, who contributed nothing and had never paid for anything in his life, was apparently the victim here who needed more space to flourish. After that dinner, things got increasingly hostile. Dad would make passive-aggressive comments about how some people need to learn responsibility and stop being freeloaders. The freeloader comment particularly stung, considering I was the one paying for everything. Mom would sigh dramatically whenever I was around and make comments about overcrowding. Anthony just ignored me completely unless he needed something, which was often. Hey, can you pick up some more energy drinks when you go grocery shopping? He'd ask, not even looking up from his phone. Can you get them yourself? I'd respond, I don't have a car. You could get a job and buy a car. I'm working on my brand right now. I can't be distracted by some random job. His brand. A TikTok account with 500 followers was a brand that couldn't be distracted by employment. 3 weeks ago, Dad told me I had until the end of the month to find somewhere else to live. He said it was for the good of the family, and that I was preventing Anthony from becoming independent. The fact that Anthony had never shown any inclination toward independence seemed irrelevant. This isn't fair to him, Dad explained, as if Anthony was some kind of victim in all this. He's trying to build something, and having you here, judging him all the time, it's stifling his creativity. I wasn't judging his creativity. I was questioning whether playing video games for 12 hours a day qualified as a career path. What happens when I leave and you can't afford the rent? I asked. We'll figure it out, Dad said with more confidence than the situation warranted. We managed before you, we'll manage after. Except they hadn't managed before me. They'd been 2 weeks away from eviction when Jake offered us this place. I wasn't too worried at first. I figured once they realized they couldn't afford the rent without me, they'd drop this nonsense. I make good money, around $4,500 a month after taxes, so finding my own place wouldn't be impossible, but I also wasn't going to be bullied out of a house I'd been paying for, just so my unemployed brother could have a bigger gaming room. I started casually looking at apartments, partly to call their bluff, and partly because I was getting tired of the hostile environment. Every day was walking on eggshells, trying not to say anything that would trigger another lecture about how I was holding Anthony back, or being unsupportive of the family. Last Tuesday, everything changed. I was at work, dealing with month-end reports and staying late to finish a project for a client who was breathing down our necks about a deadline. Around 7 p.m., I got a text from Dad that just said, "Locks changed. Your stuff is on the porch. Find your own place, Freeloader." I stared at my phone for a solid minute, convinced it was some kind of joke. The word freeloader hit me like a physical blow. After 5 years of paying their rent, utilities, and groceries, I was a freeloader? I called him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with Mom. Anthony didn't even answer when I tried him. I left work immediately and drove home, hoping this was all some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Dad had just lost his temper and sent that text in anger. Maybe they'd come to their senses by the time I got there. But sure enough, there were 3 garbage bags on the front porch, and my key didn't work in the lock. I could see the lights on inside and hear the TV, but no one answered when I knocked. I could even hear Anthony laughing at something on his computer. Life was apparently going on just fine without me. I was furious, confused, and honestly a little scared. Where was I supposed to sleep that night? I grabbed the bags and drove to a nearby hotel, my mind racing. How could they just lock me out? And more importantly, how did they think they were going to pay rent without me? As I sat in that hotel room, going through the bags they'd packed for me, I realized they'd only grabbed the most basic stuff. A few changes of clothes, some toiletries, but nothing else. My laptop wasn't there, my TV was missing, my good clothes were nowhere to be found. It was like they just grabbed whatever was most visible and shoved it in bags. That's when Dad's text really hit me. Freeloader. The audacity was breathtaking. I had been supporting this family for 5 years, paying rent, utilities, often groceries, and I was the freeloader? Anthony, who had never paid for anything in his life, was somehow more deserving of living there than I was? I was so angry I couldn't sleep. I spent the night in that hotel room, scrolling through my banking app and taking screenshots. 5 years of rent payments. Every single month, $1,200 transferred to Jake's account with rent in the memo line. 60 payments totaling $72,000, plus utilities, which added up to another $18,000 over the years, plus all the groceries, internet bills, and other household expenses I'd covered. I had spent over $90,000 keeping a roof over their heads. The more I looked at those numbers, the angrier I got. $90,000. That was a decent down payment on a house. That was a new car and a vacation to Europe. That was my financial contribution to a family that had just called me a freeloader and locked me out like some deadbeat who hadn't paid rent. The next morning, I texted the screenshots to Dad with a simple message. Here's 5 years of receipts showing who the real freeloader is. His response was immediate. That doesn't matter. It's not your house. Then whose house is it? I texted back. It's the family house. And you're not acting like family. By paying for everything? By trying to control everything. Anthony has every right to be here. You don't. He was right about one thing. It wasn't my house. It was Jake's house. And Jake was my best friend, not theirs. I called Jake around 9 a.m., after I figured he'd be up and had coffee. Jake works in tech and usually starts his day late, rolling out of bed around 8:30 and spending an hour checking emails before he's ready to deal with actual human interaction. "Hey man, what's up?" he answered, sounding cheerful. I could hear his coffee machine in the background. "I need to tell you something crazy that happened," I said, and launched into the whole story. How my parents had decided I needed to move out, how they'd changed the locks and called me a freeloader, everything. Jake was quiet for a long time after I finished. I could hear him typing on his keyboard, probably checking emails while I talked, but when I finished the story, the typing stopped. "Wait, let me get this straight," he said slowly. "Your parents think they can just kick out the person who's been paying rent for 5 years? And they called you a freeloader?" "That's about the size of it," I said. "And your brother doesn't work at all?" Nope. He makes TikToks about energy drinks. Jake started laughing, but not in a good way. It was that bitter laugh you do when something is so ridiculous, you can't process it normally. Oh, this is rich, he said. Your dad doesn't realize that he's not actually the tenant, does he? You are. You're the one who's been paying rent. Your name is on all my records. Quick pause, fellas. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way. Thanks so much for your support. All right, back to the drama. That's when it hit me. In all of this, my parents had forgotten a crucial detail. They weren't Jake's tenants. I was. Jake had been incredibly generous in letting my family live there. But legally and financially, I was the renter. My parents were essentially my subletters, though we'd never formalized it that way. What do you want to do? Jake asked. Because technically, they just locked out my actual tenant and are now illegally occupying my property. I thought about it for a minute. Part of me wanted to just walk away, find my own place, and let them figure out how to pay rent without me. But the more I thought about how they'd treated me, especially that freeloader comment, the angrier I got. What would market rate be for that house now? I asked. Oh, easily $2,200, maybe $2,400. Prices have gone up a lot in the last few years. I've been giving you guys a huge break because you're my friend and I knew your family was struggling. But if they want to play games. Jake trailed off, but I could hear the gears turning. I think, I said slowly, it might be time for a lease renegotiation. I like where this is going, Jake said. Give me a few hours to check some things and make some calls. I'll get back to you. While I waited for Jake to call back, I decided to grab some of my stuff from the porch bags and check into a nicer hotel. As I was digging through the bags, I realized they hadn't packed everything. My TV was missing, my laptop, some of my nicer clothes, my watch, my good shoes. Basically, anything of value had been left behind. When I texted Dad asking about the rest of my belongings, he responded, "What's in the bags is what you get. Everything else stays with the family." So now they were stealing from me too. Perfect. Not only was I a freeloader in their minds, but apparently my possessions belonged to them as well. I started making a mental list of everything they'd kept. My 55-inch TV that I'd bought with my first bonus at work. My laptop that I'd used for 5 years and had all my personal files on it. My good clothes that I'd need for work and interviews if I decided to look for a new job. My watch that my grandfather had given me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just them kicking me out. This was them erasing me from the family and keeping whatever they thought might be useful. Jake called me back around 3 p.m. Okay, I've got news. I talked to my property management lawyer just to make sure I understood everything correctly. We can absolutely raise the rent. The lease your parents signed was actually just a month-to-month agreement after the first year, and there's a clause that allows for rent increases with 30 days notice. Since they've decided to unilaterally change the living situation by kicking out the person who's been paying rent, that's grounds for an immediate lease renegotiation. What are you thinking? I asked. Market rate is $2,400, but given the circumstances, the sudden change in tenancy, and the fact that they're essentially breaking our original agreement, I think $3,000 is fair. Take it or leave it. I almost choked. $3,000? Hey, they wanted to play hardball. They called my best friend a freeloader and locked him out of a house he's been paying for. Actions have consequences. Plus, I've been looking at comparable rentals in the area. For a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and a decent yard in that neighborhood, $3,000 is actually reasonable. That evening, Jake drove over to the house to deliver the new lease terms in person. He called me afterward, laughing so hard he could barely speak. Dude, you should have seen their faces, he said. Your dad answered the door all confident, like he was expecting me to congratulate him on taking charge or something. When I handed him the new lease and told him rent was going to $3,000 a month, he literally turned white. What did he say? He tried to argue that we had an agreement, that the rent was supposed to be $1,200. So I told him, yeah, that agreement was with you. And since you don't live there anymore, we needed a new agreement with the actual occupants. Jake said Dad had tried to negotiate, bringing up their long-term tenancy and his job situation. He'd mentioned that they'd been good tenants who never caused problems, but Jake held firm. Market rate for a house that size was easily $2,400, and given the way they'd treated his friend, he felt $3,000 was more than fair. I gave them 48 hours to decide, Jake told me. Sign the new lease at $3,000 a month, or vacate the property. What did my mom say? She kept asking where you were and if you could come back to work things out. Your dad told her to shut up, that they didn't need you. So I told them, great, then they shouldn't have any problem affording the new rent on their own. What about Anthony? He wasn't there. Your dad said he was out working on his content or something, but I could hear video game sounds coming from upstairs, so I think he was just hiding. That night, my phone started blowing up. First it was Mom, crying and asking where I was staying, saying there had been a misunderstanding, and I should come home so we could talk like a family. When I didn't respond immediately, Dad texted, "Stop being dramatic. Come home and we'll discuss this like adults." The audacity was stunning. 24 hours ago, I was a freeloader who needed to find my own place. Now suddenly they wanted to discuss things like adults. I ignored them and went to dinner with Jake instead. We went to this nice steakhouse downtown, and I have to say, it felt good to spend money on myself for once, instead of worrying about everyone else's bills. Jake ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my family's weekly grocery budget, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about spending money on something nice. "You know what's funny?" Jake said over dinner. "Your family never once thanked me for the rent break I was giving you guys. In 5 years, I never got so much as a Christmas card or a thank you. I was doing your dad a favor, and he acted like he was entitled to it." "That sounds about right," I said. "Dad doesn't like being reminded that he needs help." Well, he's about to get a very expensive reminder. The next morning, the calls and texts intensified. Anthony even reached out, which was shocking since he usually pretended I didn't exist unless he needed something. His message was, "Bro, you need to come back. The rent thing is crazy and Dad's freaking out." This was the same brother who hadn't said more than 10 words to me in the past month, suddenly acting like we were close. Around noon, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Dad, calling from work. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I thought I was a freeloader who needed to find my own place," I said. "Don't be smart with me. This rent situation is ridiculous. You need to call your friend and fix this." "Fix what? You told me to leave." "I left. Now you're dealing with the actual cost of housing. $3,000 is highway robbery. That house isn't worth that much." "Funny how the value of the house didn't matter when I was paying for it," I said. "But you're right. You shouldn't have to pay that much. You should definitely find somewhere more affordable." Dad was quiet for a moment. Then, "Look, maybe we were hasty. You can move back in and we'll keep things the way they were." "Oh, so now you want the freeloader back?" "Stop calling yourself that. You know what I meant." "Actually, I don't think I do know what you meant. Explain to me how someone who pays all the rent, plus utilities, plus often groceries, is a freeloader." He couldn't answer that, so he hung up. That afternoon, Jake texted me. "They're asking for an extension to think about the lease." I told them sure, they can think about it somewhere else after they vacate tomorrow. The next day was Saturday, and I was having breakfast at a diner near my hotel when I saw Dad's truck pull into the parking lot. He spotted me through the window and came inside, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was messy, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had that defeated look I'd only seen once before, when he got laid off from the factory. "We need to work this out," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "What's to work out?" "You made your decision. You wanted me gone, I'm gone. The rent is too high. We can't afford $3,000 a month. Then move. It's not that simple. Anthony has his setup there, and your mother loves the house. We've built a life there." "With my money," I pointed out. Dad rubbed his face with his hands. "Look, I'm sorry about the freeloader comment. That was out of line. But you have to understand it's emasculating for a man to have his son paying for everything. So you'd rather be homeless than let me help?" "It's not about being homeless. It's about respect and independence." "Whose independence?" "Because Anthony has never been independent a day in his life, and you were ready to give him my room." We argued for another 20 minutes, but it came down to the same thing. Dad's pride was hurt that I was the provider, but he also couldn't afford to provide without me. He wanted me to come back and keep paying rent, but he also wanted to be the head of household who made the decisions. I told him that ship had sailed the moment he called me a freeloader and changed the locks. Sunday night, Jake called me laughing again. "Your parents showed up at my door with a lease application and first month's rent for $1,200. Your mom was crying and your dad was trying to negotiate. I told them the offer was $3,000, take it or leave it." "What did they say?" "Your dad started yelling about how we had a relationship, and I was taking advantage of them. So I reminded him that my relationship was with you, and they decided to end that arrangement when they kicked you out." "Did Anthony ever make an appearance?" "Nope. Your mom mentioned something about him being out with friends, but I think he's just hiding from all this." Monday morning, I got a text from Mom. "Please come home. We can't afford this new rent and your father is too proud to admit it. Anthony is applying for jobs, but you know how the market is. We need you." It was the first time anyone in my family had actually said they needed me. For 5 years, I'd been treated like I was the one who needed them, like they were doing me a favor by letting me live there while I paid all their bills. But it was too little. Too late. The damage was done. They'd shown me exactly how they really felt about me and my contributions to the family. I was useful when they needed money, but I was also an inconvenience and an embarrassment. I texted back, "You made your choice when you called me a freeloader and changed the locks." Live with it. Tuesday afternoon, Jake called with an update. They signed the lease. $3,000 a month, plus a $1,500 security deposit, since they're new tenants with no rental history. They actually signed it? Your dad did. He looked like he was signing his own death warrant, but he signed it. Your mom kept asking if there was any way to reach out to you, and your dad told her to stop. I felt a weird mix of satisfaction and sadness. I was glad they were finally facing consequences for their actions, but it was still my family. Despite everything, I didn't really want them to struggle. But then I remembered that freeloader text, and the satisfaction won out. Wednesday, I got a call from Anthony. "Dude, this is crazy. Dad's having a breakdown about the rent. Mom's talking about getting a second job. They're seriously panicking. Maybe Dad should have thought about that before he decided he didn't need the freeloader anymore." Come on, man. You're really going to let pride destroy the family? "I'm not the one who let pride destroy anything," I said. "That would be Dad. He's too stubborn to apologize properly, but you know he's sorry." "Actually, I don't know that. He's sorry he can't afford rent without me. That's different from being sorry about how he treated me. Look, I know I haven't been the best brother. I've been focused on my own stuff, and I didn't really appreciate what you were doing for the family. But we need you right now." This was probably the most self-aware thing Anthony had ever said to me. "Where were you when Dad was calling me a freeloader?" I asked. "I was upstairs. I heard it, but I didn't want to get involved." "You didn't want to get involved when your brother was being kicked out of the house he'd been paying for?" Anthony was quiet for a long moment. "I was scared they'd kick me out too if I took your side." At least he was being honest. Thursday evening, I was at a restaurant with some coworkers when I saw Mom walk in. She spotted me and came over to my table, tears already starting. "Honey, please," she said. "Can we talk privately?" I excused myself and walked outside with her. She immediately broke down crying. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "Your father was wrong to call you a freeloader. We all know how much you've done for this family. Please come home." "Mom, you stood there and let him change the locks. You agreed that I needed to leave so Anthony could have more space. This isn't just about Dad." I know. I was wrong too. But we're a family. We make mistakes, but we work through them. When have we ever worked through anything? When I pointed out that Anthony needed a job, I was told I was being unsupportive. When I mentioned that maybe I deserved some consideration since I was paying rent, I was accused of lording money over everyone. We don't work through problems. You just expect me to shut up and pay for everything. Mom couldn't argue with that because it was true. "The rent is killing us," she said quietly. "Your father's having chest pains from the stress. I'm picking up extra shifts, but it's not enough. Anthony finally got a job at the electronics store, but he's only making minimum wage." Wait, Anthony actually got a job? Yesterday. 20 hours a week to start. It's not much, but it's something. So the threat of homelessness had finally motivated my brother to join the workforce. Amazing what a little accountability could accomplish. Friday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. Something big had happened. The texts were mostly from Anthony. Dad had a panic attack at work and had to go to the ER. Mom's freaking out. "Can you please just come to the hospital?" I did go to the hospital because despite everything, he's still my father. I found Mom in the waiting room, looking exhausted and scared. She'd aged 10 years in the past week. "How is he?" I asked. "Stable. The doctor says it was stress-related. His blood pressure was through the roof." She looked at me with tired eyes. "He keeps talking about money and rent and losing the house." I sat down next to her. "Mom, you guys could have avoided all of this. All you had to do was not kick me out and call me a freeloader." I know. He knows too, even if he won't say it. His pride is going to kill him. When Dad was moved to a regular room, I went in to see him. He looked smaller somehow, older and more fragile than I remembered. The hospital gown made him look vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "Hey," he said when he saw me. "Hey!" We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then he said, "I screwed up." "Yeah, you did. I don't know how to fix it." Start by admitting that I was never a freeloader. Admit that I've been supporting this family for 5 years, and the only thanks I got was being locked out of my own home. Dad closed his eyes. "You're right. You were never a freeloader. I felt like less of a man, having my son pay for everything. So you decided to make me feel like less of a son? I didn't mean for it to go that far. We talked for about an hour. Dad finally admitted that he'd been resentful and jealous of my success, that he'd felt diminished by needing my help, and that he'd taken it out on me instead of dealing with his own issues. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was more self-awareness than he'd ever shown before. But here's the thing. Recognition of a problem isn't the same as fixing it. And 5 years of being treated like a burden, culminating in being called a freeloader and locked out, wasn't something that could be fixed with one conversation. I told Dad I forgave him, and I meant it. But I also told him I wouldn't be moving back home or resuming rent payments. That bridge had been burned too thoroughly. As for the house situation, Jake and I worked out a compromise. Since Dad was in the hospital and clearly couldn't handle the stress of the $3,000 rent, Jake agreed to reduce it to $2,200. Still market rate, but not punitive. The condition was that Dad had to acknowledge in writing that he'd been wrong to kick me out and call me a freeloader. Dad signed the letter. Anthony, surprisingly, did get a job. Turns out the threat of homelessness was a pretty good motivator. He's working at a local electronics store and actually seems to be growing up a bit. Having to show up somewhere at a specific time and deal with customers has been a reality check for him. Mom picked up extra shifts at the grocery store, and they're managing the $2,200 rent, though just barely. They had to give up cable, cancel Anthony's premium gaming subscriptions, and stop eating out. It's the first time in years they've had to actually budget and prioritize expenses. As for me, I found a nice one-bedroom apartment closer to work. It's smaller than the room I had at home, but it's mine. I don't have to deal with passive-aggressive comments about being a burden, or watch my unemployed brother get treated like royalty while I pay all the bills.